Okay. The meeting is now being recorded, just so that everyone knows. I'm Maria Volpe. I'm a professor at John Jay College and a professor of sociology there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on what part of the world you're in. We welcome everyone to this monthly breakfast that we've been holding since 9/11. This morning is breakfast number 233. We used to meet in person, and we did since between 9/11 and April. Since April, we've been meeting virtually, and all of these breakfast recordings are posted on the ACR-GNY website at the moment, at www.acrgny.org. In the future, we will also be posting them on the CUNY Dispute Resolution Center's website. These breakfasts would not be possible every month if it wasn't for our wonderful team of co-conveners. I want to thank Julie Denny, Chuck Newman, Matthew Latimer, and Nikki Borofsky. These breakfasts don't happen in a vacuum. We're just so grateful to have this wonderful team. Brief housekeeping. Feel free to raise questions in the chat. Alex will tell you more, that she's eager to hear from all of you, but feel free to do that. We encourage everyone to rename themselves during this breakfast so that we know where you're from. And you do that by hovering over your name, and you'll see 3 little blue dots in the right-hand corner. And if you click on that, you'll be able to rename yourself, and that will only be for this morning. You'll go back to your usual name after the breakfast. Other than that, this morning is a challenging one for us, and as conflict resolvers, we have a lot of work to do. We should keep thinking about our role in this larger context, and there are no simple solutions. There are no easy formulas here. When I often say, when there's a fire, firefighters go; when there are crimes, police officers go; and when there are medical situations, the medical professionals respond. We're in the middle of a lot of conflict, and the challenge for us is to think about what our response is. How do we engage conflict? I mean, we have to be careful about using the term resolution that we use, but how do we engage this incredible environment that we live in? And with that, we could have a whole discussion on that, but this morning we really are eager to hear from Alex. We will reopen the informal chat at 10 a.m. and encourage anyone who would like to continue the conversation about all that's been happening to stay on. But it's really important for us to also continue with our breakfast the way we normally do. Before I turn it over to Julie to introduce Alex, Nikki Borofsky is going to make a short announcement about ACR-GNY. Nikki?
Thank you, Maria. I don't want to hold things up, but I do want to just make an appeal to everybody and let you know that we're having our ACR-GNY annual members meeting and elections Zoom live meeting next Thursday, January 14th at 2021. I encourage everybody who is a member to join us. I encourage everybody who is not a member but would like to be a member of the ACR-GNY to become a member and then join us on Thursday. Just thank you again to John Jay, and it really is ACR-GNY and John Jay that work to put these breakfast roundtables together. And as Maria said, this coming year will be a big opportunity for conflict resolvers. So I hope to see you all soon, and thank you for joining us this morning after an eventful day yesterday.
Thank you, Nikki. And yes, this is the beginning of our 20th year holding these breakfasts. So we truly do believe in getting together once a month. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Julie to introduce our speaker this morning. Thank you so much, Alex, for joining us on this historic morning. Julie.
Good morning, everybody. We are so fortunate to have Alex Carter here today with us. Briefly, she's a clinical professor of law and the director of the Mediation Clinic at Columbia Law School. I'm sure many of you online today have worked with Alex. She's a world-renowned negotiation trainer for the UN, lots of Fortune 500 companies, courts, federal agencies. In 2019, she was awarded the Columbia University Presidential Award for Outstanding Teaching, which is Columbia University's highest teaching award. And she wrote a book in, I think it's 2020, Ask for More, 10 Questions to Negotiate Anything, closely aligned with our topic today. And it became an instant Wall Street Journal business bestseller. And it was the first negotiation book which was solo authored by a woman, hooray, to make that list. So that's it. We're so happy to have you here today, Alex. Jump in.
All right, Julie. Well, I want to thank you for that really kind introduction and thank Chuck Newman, who invited me to be here today. And most of all, to thank you, Maria. I'm going to say what you were too modest to say earlier. You know, I actually spent a lot of yesterday thinking about 9/11 and thinking about how yesterday, unlike 9/11, the call was coming from inside the house, and that this was our nation fighting against itself. And one of the things that gave me comfort was thinking back to 9/11 and where I was. And on 9/11, I was a newly minted 2L at Columbia Law School. And in the days and the weeks and the months following that tragedy, I drew enormous comfort from being in a community of problem solvers, in a community of people who were working to make sense of what had happened and to work to heal our country, not just the processes and the institutions, but the human beings, to move forward from that. And it was shortly after that time that I took my first mediation class. And I remember vividly that moment of sitting down in front of two parties in a New York City civil court jury room that we'd been allocated to mediate, which was precious, right? In those days when you actually got the room and you weren't in the hall. And after an hour thinking, this process is magic. And I wish I had known about this before, but I'm so glad I do now. And I think this is going to change what I do with the rest of my life. And indeed, it did. And so, you know, I just want to say thank you to you, Maria, for, you know, starting this group after 9/11. And I think this morning it gives me hope to think that, you know, people like Maria are going to work to make something of this. And I look forward to seeing what this community or other communities across our country and across our world create as a result of what happened yesterday. So with that, you know, I just want to say one more personal note that after graduating from Columbia, I spent 5 years out in practice as a litigator, believe it or not, before returning back to full-time academic work and leading the Mediation Clinic at Columbia. And from the first moment I entered the mediation community as a new professor, people were telling me, you have to get to the breakfast. And so it's really a meaningful thing for me here now, 20 years later, to be the speaker at my first breakfast. And so I want to thank the committee and thank everybody for being here today. In a way, this is a wonderful place, personally, may I say, for me to be this morning. And I'm so happy to be with this community. All right, so with that, a couple of procedural notes. As Maria said, you know, being a clinical professor on a normal morning in a normal semester, I would be with my students mediating in the courts of New York City. For that reason, I promise it's not possible to distract me during the presentation. And so I welcome, those of you who've mediated in civil court know, right? You know, there could be the refrigerator there, people going in to get stuff and people using the restroom and folks walking in and out. So let this please be a conversation, which is to say we have a large group, we're over 200. So I would say as a primary mode of communication, let's try chat during the presentation. I'm going to keep it open. I will respond as much as I can to comments, questions, observations. And at certain points during this presentation, being a clinical professor, I'm actually going to ask and solicit your feedback and input. So I hope that we'll have a robust discussion here this morning. Okay, and then there will be times when I'll ask people to take themselves off mute and answer questions or ask me questions themselves. All right, shall we get started? Let's do this. Okay, this is Ask for More. So good morning, everybody, and let's get started. So a brief note about Ask for More. I grew up as a mediator. I studied mediation before I ever, cracked a negotiation book and learned the principles of negotiation. I like to say that I got into negotiation backward or goofy foot as a mediator. And so Ask for More is very much a mediator's take on negotiation. And so I hope to engage you as an audience today on those two dimensions to talk about the principles from Ask for More that we can use when we are negotiating for ourselves, but also the principles and the tools and techniques we can use when we are presiding over mediations for other people and helping them to negotiate better. Okay, so I'm wondering how many here learned the same definition of negotiation that I did when I was in law school and also as a young practicing lawyer. Basically, that negotiation was a transactional back and forth between two or more people, usually over money, perhaps over something else, in order to get to an agreement. So negotiation was, once a year, one might go in to a decision maker and say, "Hi, Alex Carter, I won an award this year. I published a book. Keep me in mind when you're making your salary decisions." Or that negotiation is the immediate lead up to signing a deal or contract. Or, unfortunately, negotiation is what happens when we end up in court and we need to find a way to settle out of it. So over time, I looked at this definition and I grew more and more dissatisfied. I felt that this way of looking at negotiation was really narrow and limited and frankly reactive, as though we only negotiate when the circumstance, the once a year review or the contract or the litigation comes up. And so this is no longer what I teach. When I teach negotiation, I teach this. And so here is the first moment where I'm going to ask for some chat participation. We're looking here at a picture of a kayak going through some sea caves. And I would love it for you to look at this and tell me what this picture has to do with negotiation. If you drop it in the chat, I'm going to go ahead and read out the answers. So tell me what this picture has to do with negotiation. Okay, DK says navigating the terrain. Kira, mapping out options. G. Warner, creative solutions, unexpected. Nick says options. Donna says, I love kayaking and it's about navigating. Very interesting. Yes. Another Donna Bueller, navigating challenging territory. Gil says to us, I think this is about exploring what lies beneath. Oh, that's so interesting. Elizabeth says, avoiding obstacles. We have exploring the unknown. Danya, do I go left or right? Sarah says, light at the end of the tunnel. I really hope so, Sarah. Roseanne, navigating a difficult route. Okay, so we have a lot. This is wonderful. You guys promised me a hot bench. And indeed, we have a lot of different thoughts here. Okay, I think I want to go back to the people who said, and Gail Wright Simmons says, into the unknown. That's beautiful. So let's go back to the people who indicated navigation That's closest to where I'm going. So this picture is actually an homage to my real life honeymoon trip to Hawaii back in 2006. So I'm a junior Cravath associate. I'm in a kayak with my husband, who's also a Cravath associate. You can imagine how well that went. So we're in a kayak on the Wailua River in Kauai. And our guide up ahead turns back to us and says, please negotiate your kayaks to the left because we're headed for that beach. And that was the moment that something clicked in my brain and I thought, that's right. There's more than one way to think about negotiation. You know, when I'm negotiating my kayak toward a beach, what am I doing? I'm steering. And in that moment, I thought to myself, what would my life look like if I treated every conversation, not just the money conversations, not just the once a year performance review, not just the, you know, we're in court, we need to settle. If I treated every conversation as an opportunity to steer a relationship. And so these days, that is what I teach. Negotiation is steering. And when you think about it, you know, both as a negotiator, may I say, and as a mediator, you know, if I'm thinking about negotiating my relationships in my workplace with other faculty members, with students, this is something that I want to do like paddling a kayak year round. Those of you who've kayaked, right, Donna, you would know, you know, what happens if you sit in the boat and you put your paddle down? Right? What happens to that? So if you do, you know that you don't really go anywhere, right? Or you might get taken in a direction you don't want to go, because if you're not steering, then something else like the water or the current or the wind is going to steer for you. So thinking about, you know, paddling through those relationships in every conversation we have. Likewise, as a mediator, you know, I see my work as starting from the moment a case gets referred, all of the different conversations that happen before we get into joint session, right? And then everything that happens afterward, every interaction is part of my steering my relationship with those parties in a direction that's going to be productive for them. Now, you know, this picture is lovely. I feel like there's just one problem with it, don't you? I mean, look at this. We're navigating these beautiful placid waters. It looks quite relaxing. I don't know about for all of you, but my life since March 9th has not felt like this photo. I would say it's felt a little bit closer to this, right? Where maybe it's a little bit less about drinking in the beautiful scenery and a little bit more about how do I not end up on the rocks. I will say that both as a negotiator and as a mediator, I've noticed a lot of changes in the people that I'm dealing with day to day. Everyone feels like they're on a knife's edge in terms of how much they have going on in their lives, how many pressures they are facing, you know, and for many of us who are entrepreneurs or employed in different environments, it can feel really challenging to maintain a job, to maintain an income, to maintain housing. And so I just want to encourage everyone that the approach to negotiation that I share works really well for this. This is when I wrote the book, but I've been promoting it and speaking to many thousands of people during this. And as mediators know, we're often dealing with waters like this, aren't we? People are coming to us in kind of the category 4 rapids of their lives, you know, the roughest moments, the most challenging terrain. And so we know that the techniques that we have to help people during sunnier times are also great for times like these. So to recap, a negotiation is any conversation in which you are steering a relationship. And we have the opportunity to think about every one of those conversations is an opportunity to steer that for mutual gain. Here's the last thing though, you know, and I'm thinking, Julie, I'm just looking at your face while I'm presenting. I'm thinking about, you know, the old definition of negotiation as a transactional back and forth between two people. The biggest thing I think that gets lost there is that people think negotiation starts from the moment you sit down with someone else, and it does not. When you think about negotiation as steering relationships, what is the most important relationship of our lives? It's the one we have with ourselves. And that is where every negotiation starts. It doesn't start when we sit down with somebody else, you know, when Nikki and I sit down to work something out. It starts at home with me. And so I want to talk about steering the relationship with ourselves before we even get in the room with anyone else. Okay, so how do we steer these relationships? What's the most effective way to do that? The answer is somewhat counterintuitive, maybe to many, perhaps not to the experienced mediators in this group. The best way to negotiate is not to lead with our arguments, contrary to a lot of popular wisdom. It's to lead with our questions. So there is lots of research to show that asking questions is the single most important thing we can do to set ourselves up for negotiation success. So 2 pieces of research. There's research by Dr. Tasha Eurich, an organizational psychologist, to show that leaders, so people who lead companies, who lead teams, who lead nations, and leaders who are the most effective are the ones who are asking themselves the right questions. And then once we sit down with somebody else, research from Professor Lee Thompson out of Northwestern showing that 93% of people are not asking the questions they need in order to get the best results at the table. So Rebecca has just asked, will these slides be forwarded? They will be forwarded. I promise the second I'm done, I'm going to send them off to Maria and the team, and you will all get the slides. So if you like to take notes because that helps you, do that. But otherwise, no need, because you'll get the slides. So what Thompson found was, you know, these 7% of people, not only were they generating more trust across the table by asking the right questions, but they were also doing better financially. So it's incredibly, incredibly important. Elizabeth reminds us, questions elicit answers in their likeness. It's absolutely right. And I'm going to talk in a little bit about something that I learned from my mentor, Carol Liebman, about the power of asking the right questions. We also have a note here. Ksenia says, if I'm in a junior role and I negotiate with questions at work, I do achieve my goal in terms of the result, but I don't get credit for the result. Ksenia, I have some slides on this very topic in the back half of the presentation. So I'm going to cover them, and then I want you to let me know at the end if I've answered your question. If not, I'll take it. All right, so we're going to go now through the framework of Ask for More. So the framework is quite simply 10 questions. I wrote this book not for a law school academic audience. I wrote it for the kind of audiences that we mediate in front of. I wanted people who see us in mediation to have some of the tools that we use as mediators so that they could use that for themselves earlier on, and maybe even empower themselves to ask the right questions so they don't end up in mediation. So the 10 questions are divided as possible, okay? So the first 5 questions are what I call the mirror. Those are questions we ask ourselves. The second half of the book is what I call the window. And that's 5 great questions that we can and should be asking other people. So for today's presentation, because I have other material I also want to cover, I've picked out 2 questions from the mirror section and 2 questions from the window. And I'm going to talk to you about what those questions are, why they're in the book, and a bit about the applications. So focusing in the mirror, and Harvey says, we had a wonderful presentation many years ago at our breakfast from Appreciative Inquiry. I love that, Harvey, and I'll look forward to your thoughts at the end of this presentation. So negotiation, again, starts at home with us. And this is about what kinds of questions are we asking ourselves? You know, we ask ourselves questions every day. Most of the time, we're asking ourselves unhelpful questions that keep us stuck in the past, that keep us stuck in blame, that don't help us move forward. And may I say, I do this to myself, even as a mediator. You know, sometimes you need like doctor, heal thyself. Sometimes I'm in the room with parties and I have all the right questions to ask them. And I struggle to turn that on myself and ask myself the questions that are going to help me see my own situation in a way that moves me forward. You know, I have a lot of people ask me, and in particular, I counsel large numbers of women about negotiation. And women frequently will ask me, you know, Alex, what is my source of power in negotiation? How can I hold firm in what I know I'm worth? And what I tell people is your source of power is not what you think it is or what you've been taught. It's not, you know, how large you can be in the room. In fact, you can't see me, but I'm 5'2" in sneakers. So I'm never the largest person in any room, and they don't see me coming frequently until I have crawled up inside their brain space and taken a look around. It's not how large you are. It's not how aggressive you are. It's not the size of your bluster. It is knowledge. Knowledge is your seat of power as a negotiator. It's how well you know yourself and how well you know the situation that enables you to sit down at the table with clarity and confidence. Okay, so let's talk about the two mirror questions that I've pulled out for you today. And the first one is one that I spoke to the Wall Street Journal about back in May. And they asked me, Alex, where should every negotiation start? And I told them it should start here. What's the problem I want to solve? Isn't this familiar to many of us as mediators? Defining the right problem to solve and engaging with the way people see the problem is key to whether we achieve negotiation success. So let me talk about this from a couple of different vantage points. In Ask for More, I talk about how problem definition is the equivalent of getting in your kayak, you have your paddle at the ready, and you're looking ahead to see which beach you want to end up on. Otherwise, you're going to find that you've paddled all day long and you've ended up in the jungle. So it's beginning with the end in mind, figuring out how we define the problem to solve. And this can often be trickier than we think. When I think about problem definition, I often think about this. So I wrote in Ask for More about Steve Jobs and the Apple Corporation, and I took us back more than a decade ago. Steve Jobs had just invented the iPod. Does anybody remember this? Back when you had a device that would actually play music, like a separate device. So he invents the iPod, and it is a wild success. I mean, millions and millions of people are buying the iPod. But what happens is Steve Jobs starts to look at what's happening, and he sees people taking their iPod and putting it into a giant bag alongside their BlackBerry, remember those? Their Palm Pilot with the stylus that people would always lose. And he realized, I've solved the wrong problem. I've given people yet another device to add to their bag, their collection of devices. What we really need to solve is, what's the one device, the single device that people can use for all of their needs, whether it's music or computing or scheduling. And so he set to work inventing the iPhone. So thinking about the right problem to solve. I think problem definition can also be really challenging when people are facing a crisis. You know, I've counseled a lot of companies during this period, and one company came to me and they said, Alex, we're facing this tremendous challenge. We've just lost an entire segment of our business. We had a segment of our business that was selling our product through to coffee shops. And that business is now dead in the wake of the pandemic. And they said, so we need your help. We're short on revenue for June. And so we need to blast our entire Rolodex. We need to message out and so that we can gain some new clients and recoup our revenue losses for this coming month. And I said, okay, so hold on. What's the problem we want to solve here? And is it merely that we're trying to bring dollars in the door at any cost, right, during this month? In which case, let's play it out. What happens then if we haven't brought in the best clients for you? And so they leave, and then we're doing this all over again in July, August, and September. Or are we trying to pivot your business and figure out your best long-term clients? Because if that's the problem we're trying to solve, then we're not blasting the Rolodex of 2,000 people. We're sending targeted pitches to 10, right? So defining the right problem to solve is so key then to directing your steps. The last thing I'll say about this is I've thought about this a lot in, the wake of our political divide, and, in terms of the modern racial justice movement that has been sweeping our nation. Last year, in the wake of George Floyd's murder, there was a discussion on the clinical professors listserv. And people were talking in the wake of the murder about problems that needed to be solved. And I remember, I'm here today as a white woman, and I remember other white professors, well-meaning, saying, okay, so the problem is we have to figure out what this officer can be charged with. And so on the listserv, people were debating, which charge might be sustained and how, a more severe charge could be sustained. And then some Black professors started weighing in and saying, basically, like, with respect, the problem here is not what this officer is going to be charged with. The problem is that I can't walk down the street without fear that I'm going to get shot. The problem is that I let my children and my spouse go every day knowing that they too could be shot for existing in the world. The problem is an existential threat to my safety and my having to demonstrate my worth as a human being. A lot of times as a mediator, when we see conflict in the room, it is because of the different ways that the parties conceive of the problem to be solved. So as a negotiator, I'm working to figure out, for me, what I think the problem is. As a mediator, I'm looking at the parties, and the first order of business is figuring out how do they see the problem and engaging with that before we can move forward. Okay, so the second question I wanted to engage with in the mirror here, and Chris says, here, that is my problem. That's the problem that my people have in America. Chris, thank you for that perspective. I'm so glad you weighed in. And I hope that you'll continue to weigh in throughout the presentation with your perspective. It's valued here today. So let's talk a bit about people who struggle with confidence in negotiation. I've had a lot of people who feel anxious when they negotiate. Maybe it's about the process of negotiation, or maybe it's about the actual substance of what they are going in to advocate for. There is a really powerful question that we use as mediators that people should use and ask themselves before every negotiation, especially if they have any anxiety about it. And that question is this: how have I handled this successfully in the past? This is an incredibly powerful question to ask yourself on a daily basis before you tackle the challenges ahead of you. Why? 2 reasons. First, my colleague Adam Galinsky from Columbia Business School and others did a study to show that simply by asking yourself about a prior success before going in to negotiate, you are more likely to negotiate better. Why? Because this question acts like a power prime on your brain. You think about a prior success and you put your brain back in that state to help you go in and negotiate better. But the other reason to ask this question is it's a data generator. It helps us when we write down in detail how we've achieved past success. We can find clues to help us in the future. This question really came out of my work as a mediator. How often do we have people in front of us, and it's a business relationship or a personal relationship, and something has gone wrong? But when we look at what's happened, there has been a history of prior success. I wonder how many of you mediators here on the call today have asked this very question and have asked parties themselves. So tell me about the times when things went well. Can we talk about what was going right back when your business partnership was functioning really well? It's an incredibly powerful question because it helps generate data and diagnose the issue that we need to solve here. And Nick reminds us, it's also how I've handled this incorrectly in the past. And Nick, I'm so glad you brought that up. Here's what I want to say. Yes, we can always learn lessons from how we handle things incorrectly in the past. And as I tell my students, I boldly go out and fail every day so that I can come to the classroom equipped with learning experiences to share with you and to model how to come back from that. But, here's what I want to say. Thinking about when things have gone right is something we don't do often enough. And that is what can give us this powerful emotional benefit to put our brains, back in this state to help us go forth and solve the problem. There's lots of research to show that positive emotions are incredibly effective in helping us to be creative instead of reactive, and generative as we move forward. Elon asks, is this called emotional anchoring? I've used this in my mediations to great effect. I think, Elon, I'll want to hear more about that at the end. I think this is kind of a cousin of this. I would put this in the category of, anchoring yourself in a positive experience and then using that to generate data as well as to put yourself back in that brain space. If I can give one more example for this question, I want to talk here today to anyone. I wonder if anyone here is in this category, and people have been really candid here today. I wonder if there's anyone who feels that they do a tremendous job of helping other people negotiate, but they struggle to do it for themselves. And here's where I'm going to say that as a younger professional, a younger woman in the legal profession, and I see you nodding, Nikki. Thank you. Thank you, Teresa. I appreciate people weighing in on this. So, because I think Chris says me, okay, right? So a lot of folks, okay, Hallie, thank you. Oh, it's lovely to see. So if you are that person, you're fantastic. You are formidable on behalf of your colleagues, your parties in mediation, people you supervise, your friends, your family, and you struggle to do it for yourself, then here is what I want you to do. I want you to write down what makes you such a successful advocate for other people, the strategies you use, the mental tricks you use to make you so effective, and then I want you to apply that to yourself. This question is so powerful for that, right? And so, Nikki, I'm looking at you, and I want you think about this question, right? How it is that you're so effective for other people, and then think about how you can use that on yourself. This is the single most effective strategy I have for helping people really build their confidence in negotiation. And I also know because I once was that person, and it's been incredibly effective for me. Wendy is noting all of the yeses are from women. And Wendy, this is something that we're going to talk about. It's not exclusively women. I counsel a lot of men as well who struggle to negotiate, but I will say that some of that also can be culturally dependent. I teach a lot of students at Columbia who are students of color. They are the children of immigrants. They come from all over the world, and they may come with different ingrained attitudes about how or whether they should negotiate for themselves. In fact, I had a student write to me. He graduated 5 years ago, and he wrote to me last week privately and said, "Professor, I just achieved this huge victory. Do you think I can post about this on LinkedIn?" And I said, "I think you're writing me because you know what my answer is. You know that I'm going to tell you, I'm going to order you, okay? In fact, as your professor, with what limited authority I have, I'm going to order you to go post that, and then I can't wait to read and comment on it." So people still struggle to advocate for themselves, and I can't wait to talk more about that in the back half. All right, so now we are moving on to the window. And here's where we are asking questions of somebody else. We're leading with questions in our negotiation, and we're doing this in order to create trust. We're gathering information and designing better solutions. So you remember Lee Thompson's study that I was talking to you about, where I said that only 7% of people were asking the right questions. What are those questions? The mediators in the room know. They are not cross-examination questions, right? They're not the questions that I grew up seeing when I was watching endless episodes of Law and Order with my dad. They are open questions. They're what Professor Thompson called diagnostic questions about people's needs, their concerns, and their goals. Those are the questions that generate better relationships and more value at the table. And here's where I want to pause for a second to say, Chris has weighed in on the previous point we were talking about. Black Americans are sometimes hesitant to negotiate for themselves at times due to the caste system and racism in America. Interesting point on cultural impact. Yes, Chris, there's a tightrope that a lot of folks walk in the workplace. And I can't speak to that lived experience. But a lot of times, you know, my Black students who hesitate to ask for more, it's in part because they have been taught or they have imbibed the message, you're lucky to be here. That's the message sometimes that they get in the overwhelmingly white spaces they enter. And that is part of the reason that they hesitate. And it's with good reason, because they're reading the room. Yep, absolutely. Thank you, Chris, again, for that perspective. Okay, so we're talking about questions to ask other people. And I thought I would lead with example here. So I'd love to give everyone an opportunity to interview me this morning. And I'm here to tell you that, believe it or not, and we'll talk about this, I somewhat recently took a family vacation. And so you'd like to find out as much information as you can about that vacation. And so I'd love to hear your questions. And if you could drop your questions in the chat. Robin said, what did you enjoy most about it? So Robin, what I enjoyed most about it was a lunch that we had over the weekend with my brothers and their families and with my dad. Teresa asks, what was your favorite food? Teresa, my favorite food was the amazing lobster roll that I had. And by the way, here's where I'm going to get political, okay? I would just like to put out there that lobster rolls should only be made with warm drawn butter, okay? And so if you like your lobster roll with cold mayo, we're gonna have a fight on our hands. Okay, so what else have people asked me in here? Where did you go and why? Harvey, I went to Cape Cod, Massachusetts, and I went there because that's where my dad and stepmom live, and I go there every year. Jonathan said, did you go to the place you wanted to go? Yes. How did you stay COVID safe? Thanks, Gail. We quarantined, we made it almost 14 days, a 12-day quarantine, and then we drove straight up in order to be safe. All right, so now I'd like to go to a question that a lot of people have asked me. I see Elizabeth has asked me this question, Joseph, Sarah, Julie, Ellen, Donna, and more. And people said, Alex, can you tell us about your family vacation? And yes, I'd be happy to tell you. So every year for Labor Day, my dad's entire side of the family goes up to Cape Cod, where he lives full time, and we have a family reunion. This year was different for multiple reasons. We had a smaller group go because of COVID. It was only my brothers and their families and me and my family. But it was also different because we didn't think that my dad was going to live to see this Labor Day. My father is dying of a terminal brain disease. He has frontotemporal dementia. And we already thought he was in hospice as we began this year. We didn't think he was going to make Labor Day. But then on top of that, on May 5th, 2020, the day that my book came out and I reached the greatest professional milestone of my life, I got a call from my dad's hospice facility to say that he had COVID and they didn't think he would last more than 24 hours. And so for the first 2 weeks that the book was out there in the world, I was waiting for a 4 p.m. FaceTime from hospice with my dad and basically to find out if he was still with us. Unbelievably, he beat COVID. It took him 5 weeks. He survived. And even more unbelievably, he made it to Labor Day and we were able to have a socially distanced outdoor lunch at my father's facility with my brothers and their new babies who my dad was able to see. And that is all about my family vacation. So what does this tell us? It tells us, and by the way, thank you so much for these kind words in the chat. I can't believe I'm saying this, but my father is still alive today. I think somebody maybe failed to tell him what hospice is supposed to mean because he's been there for over a year and he shows up to live every day as though he's showing up to his job. So people are talking about how the open question elicited so much more emotion and context. And isn't this true every day? Don't we find that the questions we ask of ourselves and other people shape the entire way we see our reality? I'll never forget, I was at a networking event last year before everything shut down. I was at a different college, and I found myself talking to the president's wife. And we were standing at this large networking event, and people said, people were asking her, so how do you like being in the president's office? And she said, oh, it's great. And I asked a few closed questions, and then I looked to her and said, I'd love to hear more, can you tell me about your day-to-day and what that looks like? And she paused for a moment and she said, oh my gosh, nobody has asked me that question. And I don't know how to answer it because I'm here with my husband and he's the president of the university and it's exciting. But a month ago, my eldest daughter died of cancer. And so I'm really lost day to day. Never forgotten that, how the simple act of asking someone an open question, can help you learn so much more about who they are, how they see themselves and their situation. And so mediators know that the two magic words that we should use to start every occasion are these. It's tell me. When I'm teaching people to mediate, new mediators, sometimes they think that you go into a mediation and you start by saying, what's your number? What are your claims? What are your defenses? How much are you willing to pay? And they're surprised when I say that I always start by asking people, tell me what's brought you here. Because in mediation, aren't we looking to engage with what that other person thinks the problem is to solve? And we don't know until we ask whether it might be a relationship problem, a business problem, a legal problem. And tell me is the question that leads us to who people are. This is a question that I use when I work with companies. It's actually incredibly effective for business generation. So there was a company I was working with during coronavirus. They used to go in and pitch for client work by coming in with the team and giving the pitch deck. And then they learned this, and they called me incredibly excited because they had a potential client that they had seen twice before. And twice they had gone in with the pitch deck, the glossy pitch deck, and they thought they had the business and they didn't get the business. This time they walked in and said, we're so happy to be here. Tell us how you're seeing the sector and where we might fit in. That was the moment, after a couple of seconds of stunned silence, that the person said, okay, so do you want to hear why we didn't go with you last time? And they opened up and talked about the problem they had. That is when this company won the business. And I'll never forget the head of business development calling me and saying, Alex, I went to business school. I did this all these years. Who knew that I could say 2 words and shut up? And that's how I would be the most effective salesperson. But I want to bring this question back to some of the events that are on people's minds. So yet again, after the murder of George Floyd, I reached out to a lot of my Black graduates from Columbia who were working at different law firms and organizations. And I asked them what their firms and their companies were doing to support them. And I got a really interesting answer. So 2 people respond to me. The first Black professional tells me that her business unit head, very well-meaning, writes her a note and asks, are you okay? What is the answer to that, right? That is a closed question. And she felt pressure to say, thank you, I'm fine. I appreciate you asking about me. The second associate said her head of firm reached out to her personally and said, tell us how you're doing and tell us how we can better support you. And that associate felt truly welcomed to share her feedback, to open up a conversation. And it really started something at that firm that led to a more systemic solution to support Black professionals in the workplace, right? So think about the questions that we are asking people. Sometimes we can ask great questions in the mediation room, but we struggle to ask open questions of the people we see every day, whether it's our colleagues in the workplace or whether it's even our family in the home. Do you know, last year, as I was writing the chapter on Tell Me for Ask for More, I dropped my daughter off at her first ever swim meet in town. This is last summer. I pick her up at the end of the night and she comes out of the locker room and she is crying, I mean, weeping. And I said, oh my gosh, Cece, what's wrong? I was really concerned. And she said, Mommy, I really don't like these locker rooms. You have to share showers. And a girl came in while I was showering and it was so awkward. Okay. So at this point, she's almost 9. And I think to myself, well, I think I know what this is, right? It's probably body anxiety. Maybe she's starting to look at other people or she thinks they're looking at her. But I didn't assume. I said, tell Mommy what made it awkward. And she looked at me and was like, isn't it obvious, Mom? And I was like, I don't know, tell Mommy. And she goes, we wanted our shower at different temperatures. Right? This is the sound of like my brain exploding. You know, here's the thing. We think we know what's on the minds of the people closest to us, but we often don't, and we won't unless we ask them to tell us. So this, my 2 favorite words for every occasion. Okay, and so the second note, and by the way, I just want to say, we've had so many comments in the chat that I want to genuinely, from the bottom of my heart, thank people for the prayers for my dad. His name is Richard Carter, as well as for people sharing their own situation with ill parents. I know that I am not the only person who during the pandemic has a relative in a care facility, and it's so hard and you feel so, you know, deeply disconnected and you wish you could be there. I will say that one of the things that's helped me is going back to the very first question I started this presentation with, what's the problem I'm trying to solve? You know, sometimes you're faced with an unsolvable problem. I can't take away my father's dementia, and I can't be there in person to hold his hand because they're in lockdown again. But sometimes what helps me is to think of a problem I can solve. You know, how can I create connection with him from afar? You know, how can you support somebody who doesn't have the ability to speak? You know, you can sing, you can play music. I find that when we look, there's always a problem we can solve, and that's a great place to put our focus. So the last question I'd like to go through with you today from the window is exceptionally helpful for running into impasse. You know, what happens if you get a no in negotiation, or, you know, you run into a snag? And I will say that a lot of times, especially for the women I talk to, you know, they worry about negotiating for themselves because they think, what if I get a no? You know, as though a no is a referendum on your worth. And hearing a no means something is fundamentally wrong with you as a person and you need to crawl out of the office on all fours and never bring up the topic again. And here's what I'd like to say, you know, no is information. No can be an opportunity, and you don't need to argue in response to a no. In fact, that's not what you should do. Just ask this question. What are your concerns? This is my #1 question to ask, to think about, you know, if somebody's brought to me and they say, no, that's not going to work, Alex, what are your concerns? You know, this person doesn't understand me. Tell me your concerns. What are your concerns is a great way to get at somebody's feelings without using the F word, right? So thinking about sometimes when we're in a workplace situation, you know, people don't want to talk about their feelings, but they will tell you about their concerns. The key is, you know, to really listen and honor those concerns. So if somebody says no, and I ask them, what are your concerns? You know, and then we are able to engage with that. I listen to it, I summarize it. Often, you know, more than not, we can find a way to work together, even despite the concerns. You know, I'm thinking about this in the context of, may I say, promoting a book during coronavirus. As of March 2nd, I had lunch with my literary agents and they looked ahead to my full calendar and they said, oh, Alex, you know, you're killing it. You're doing great. You have so many events here in the States. You have so many events abroad. It's going to be tremendously successful. And then over the next 10 days, every single one of those events evaporated. And one by one, people called me to say, we're canceling the event and we're not going to do a digital event either. And so I looked, and everywhere I saw it was a no. And you know, gradually I called people one by one and I said, what are your concerns with a digital event? And one company told me, well, you know, we haven't done it before and we don't have a person who could run it. And I said, would it help if I could run the event? I have somebody that can help. And they said, yes, actually, that would be great. We held the event. The second company said, no, we're not doing a virtual event. And I called them and I said, what are your concerns? And they said, well, we're not sure our employees would want one. And I said, how might we find that out? And they said, well, I suppose we could do a survey. They did the survey. People wanted the event. The thing that I'm most proud of is my local bookstore. It's a really famous bookstore called Words. They said, we're not going to do a digital event. And I called them and I said, what are your concerns with doing a book event? And they said, Alex, we're struggling right now because most of the time a book event feels like kind of a promotional thing. And we feel like the world is really heavy right now and we only want to do things that are going to serve other people. And I said, you know what? I actually share that goal. And what if we didn't make it a book event? What if we made it a free training for people whose small businesses were suffering during coronavirus to help equip them? And what if we used it as a fundraising opportunity for our local food pantry and donated money for every person that got on the call? I am proud to say that because of that one question, what are your concerns? We came up with an event that resulted in a $3,000 donation to our local food pantry and equipped hundreds of small business owners from New Jersey and around the country to have tools to help them renegotiate their obligations so they could stay in business. Sometimes when you ask this question and you truly listen, and John asks, how do you teach students to listen to the answers to that question? John, listening is the most advanced skill I teach, and I am still learning it myself, right? So we could spend an entire semester and an entire lifetime learning how it is to listen. The best tools I have are summarizing, but the other thing, John, I would say is what enables me to listen is asking myself questions first so that I'm really clear on what I'm feeling, what I need. And so I arrive at the table with somebody else free of that kind of mental chatter that interrupts my ability to listen. And Amelia says, oh, you live in South Orange. Words is an incredible bookstore. All right, so let's go. We have some number of time left. I would say in the next 10 minutes or so, I'm going to wrap up with some additional things that I'd like to talk about today. So here's a piece of advice that I have at the end of Ask for More. Ask for More is a process-focused negotiation book. It is about asking good questions and creating a good process because as mediators, we know that good processes are more likely to produce good results. At the end of the book, I have a frame that people can use when you're making your asks. So you've asked good questions of yourself, you've asked good questions of someone else. How do you make your requests in a way that are more likely to be accepted? And this is a great formula. It's called the I-we. Here's what I'm asking, and here's how we all benefit. You know, you're uniquely positioned to be able to execute the I-we because most people don't take the time to ask the open questions so that they understand the we, the other person's part of the equation. When we do an I-we help people focus on common interests and what we can gain rather than lose from working together. So here are a couple of examples. I need 2 more days to analyze this problem. When you allow us time up front to do that work and get it right, we all benefit from a durable solution that's not going to boomerang back. It is also a great way to advocate for yourself. And I want to talk to the women in the room here, right? Anyone who feels that they are walking a tightrope at work when they advocate, the I-we is incredibly effective, and it's proven to be super effective for women to advocate for yourself and also, right, to have people know that you are collaborative, right, and not to get penalized. I'm going to talk about that in a minute, right, for not being collaborative. Okay, and thank you, Daphne. I appreciate that feedback. So the I-we is something that I personally use all the time and that I train people to use. It is really, really effective. One more note on this. I traveled to Israel back in 2014 and was talking to negotiators both there and in the Palestinian Authority. And negotiators on both sides said, we will never solve this conflict until we figure out how to write the other side's victory speech. And isn't that so true of the work that we do in mediation and negotiation? The we involves us figuring out how is it that I can help that other person write their victory speech? How can I help them sell this to their audiences, their constituents, the people who are relying on them? So the we is one of the ways that we can get there. Okay, and so, for the last portion of my presentation today, I want to share with you my personal mission. I don't just train people in negotiation and mediation. I am here as a female negotiation trainer in a field that is overwhelmingly still male-dominated. And everywhere I go, this is my mission. I see what we know as conflict resolvers as a tool that can help people and institutions achieve empowerment and equity. What does that mean? I see conflict resolution tool as a tool to help each person achieve their highest and best, but also to come together and create spaces of equity where everyone has a meaningful voice at the table. Asking for more is not just about asking for more for ourselves, it's asking for more of ourselves and our institutions. And so I want to share a few research and strategies here today. So I'd like to talk first about women generally. And I want to talk today about claiming credits and claiming expertise. And this goes all the way back to the comment that we got at the beginning of the conversation about claiming credit. So I counsel a lot of women, very senior women in the legal profession and in business, who it doesn't matter whether you're the head of a firm, you're the head of the compensation committee, you are the general counsel of a large organization. Over and over, I talk to women who are incredibly accomplished, credentialed, hardworking, brilliant, and they still don't feel the same sense of innate confidence as their male peers. And so women, when claiming credit, will frequently say we when talking about something they personally have done, whereas men can feel comfortable saying I for something that is, at least in part, a team effort. And here's where I want to say, as a professor, I nominate students every year for prizes at Columbia Law School, and for global prizes for the whole class. Last year, I nominated a woman and a man for big prizes at Columbia Law School. And I said, I want you please each to write me the first draft of your nomination. And then I'm going to take that and I'm going to do something with it. Do you know that the woman wrote me a neutral reference? She basically wrote me the bullet points where she showed up, on what dates, and bare bones details about the projects that she did. This person led my entire United Nations training program. She was single-handedly responsible for coaching dozens and dozens of mediation. She was indispensable. Okay, the man wrote me a narrative that said, I'm going to make up a name. I'll use my husband's name, Greg. Greg was indispensable to the operations of the clinic this semester. He played a leading role on this. He was pivotal on that. And here's the thing, Greg was not inaccurate. He simply told the best version of his story, whereas the woman wrote me a series of bullet points. So I'm telling you, I called her up and I said, okay, this stops today. I'm going to send you 2 documents. I sent her back her nomination and I sent her his. And I said, we're going to talk about this. And from that day forward, I said, your work is learning how to claim credit and tell your story, right? And there are ways to do it as a collaborative person. It doesn't have to be all I. It's not just I, Alex, I did, I achieve, I demand. There are ways to say, I'm incredibly proud of the result we achieved, and I'm grateful to the team for supporting me in this effort, right? You don't want the I to get lost. And by the way, that woman rewrote her nomination and she won the overall prize at Columbia Law School, which was incredibly well-deserved, and I'm so proud. Okay, that's claiming credit. Now let's talk about claiming expertise, okay? Women, again, no matter how senior we are, how credentialed, how much time we have spent in a field, we can be allergic to saying, I am an expert in. Women are more likely to undercut our expertise in an effort to make ourselves seem smaller or more relatable. But we know that this can make us come across as cautious and doubtful, undercutting our strengths. So a real life example, this was a study that was quoted in the New York Times. A female presenter went into a mixed gender group and asked whether anyone had expertise in breastfeeding. A man raised his hand. He had watched his wife for several months. He felt that he had some expertise to offer. The women in the crowd, some of whom were breastfeeding experts, did not come forward. They had expertise. So do you know, I saw this and I decided to do some personal research. So I went home to my husband, who, like I said, fellow graduate of Columbia Law School. We worked together at Cravath for a few years. And as he was coming out of the shower that night, I said, honey, would you say that you have expertise in breastfeeding? And he thought for a moment and he said, well, you know, our daughter's almost 9, so I don't know that I would say that anymore. In other words, right, for the first 8 years of her life, he was like, I've got some expertise, but it was getting a little stale as he entered, she was almost 9. And here's what makes this a funny story, because my husband is a truly equal partner to me in every way. Boots on the ground, childcare, housework. He has turned down job opportunities so that I can do everything that I want to do in my career. But when he shows up somewhere, the expert has arrived, and he's not shy about saying it. And here's where, with permission, I wanted to share something personal with this group, which is, you know, here I am, I'm a professor, I've worked hard in my field, and I published a book. And in the course of publishing the book, I struggled greatly with the idea that I was going to claim my expertise. The single hardest part about writing my book proposal was not writing the substance. It was writing the part where I had to talk about who I was and my expertise in terms that would let a publisher know, right, to buy this book. So Simon & Schuster bought the book, and we received a lot of bids for it. And then they sent me this. And they said, Alex, now that we've bought your book, we wanted you to see the comparable books in your field. These are the best-selling books that we think would be on the bookshelf next to yours. 8 books, 16 authors, and 1 woman, Sheila Heen, all right, on difficult conversations. And I remember looking at this and having moments of discouragement where I wondered, you know, not our community here, but people out there in the world at large, you know, are they going to look at a woman? I do have gray hair, I just color it, you know, but are they going to look at a woman and say, that's a negotiation expert? That's somebody I'm going to buy a book from. And so that's why, you know, Julie, when you read out, you know, that the book made the business bestseller list, it was incredibly meaningful, because part of what I wanted to do and ask for more is to expand people's view, thank you, Nikki, of what negotiation expertise can look like, and to teach people that negotiation expertise can come in all different seats, from people of all genders, all races. And I hope this is just the beginning of many, many more voices speaking to people on the international stage, because I certainly know many experts in our field, many of whom are on the call today from all different backgrounds who are experts. And so, you know, if you are ever someone on this call who has struggled with claiming your own expertise, I want to ask you, if you've received value from this presentation today, I want you to know that the only reason you're hearing it is because I got over my imposter syndrome, and that I decided to stand up and offer my expertise. And I want you to know that there are people out there waiting for you to offer yours, and they're waiting for a message that only you can deliver. And so I hope that you will get out there and you will offer it. Okay, deep breath. I want also to talk about women of color here today. And, you know, for those of you who are seeing me, and thank you, this is so lovely, all of the feedback in the chat. And somebody wrote me a private message to say, this is exactly the struggle I have every day. Thank you for highlighting this. And I'm so glad this is helpful. I think it's important, you know, as a mediator, I try to lead with transparency. and let people know there are places where I've struggled too, because it's important that we normalize what this is like, and that everybody can experience imposter syndrome. So here today, I'm sitting here as a white woman. And so I am not here to say that I have firsthand experience, lived experience that can apply to everybody. And so what I'd like to do is present some research on negotiation and women of color. And then I'd like to point you to somebody who does have firsthand experience so that you can learn from her. So, we talked about that tightrope, and while all women walk a tightrope between being liked and being respected, women of color are more often characterized and stereotyped. They're walking two tightropes, right? They're walking the tightrope based on sex, and they are, walking a tightrope based on their race, their ethnicity, their other characteristics. So, it's important to recognize that negotiation doesn't look the same for everyone. The hurdles that I face are not maybe the same as a hurdle that a man might face, but they're also not the same as the hurdles that my sisters of color face, and we can't pretend that it's otherwise. So on negotiation and self-advocacy, studies show that women of color are the most likely to be asked to do what's called office housework. What does that mean? It means non-compensable tasks. So are you chairing that diversity committee and spending hours every week on the atmosphere at your company? Are you recruiting at events for women of color? Are you, because you're a Black woman in leadership, is every single Black woman at your firm calling you to ask you to coffee because you are mentoring them? All of these are stories from people who I know. They are either women that I graduated with from Columbia Law School, or they are women I have taught. And, there's all sorts of research out there about how you can tactfully decline, office housework. But if you're being asked to do it, and if you do enjoy doing some of it, keep track of this. Make your work visible. So to my Black students who go out into law firms and companies, I tell them, I want you to write down every single recruiting event that you go to for Black women on behalf of that firm. I want you to write down all the efforts you make on the diversity committee, if you're planning goodbye parties for people. And so, all of that should be made visible, and then repeatedly raise it to people. Maria, I just wanted to let you know about the incredible results we got from these last 3 recruiting events. We recruited 20 associates of color. I'm so proud of this. I spent 20 hours this month, wanted to fill you in, right? Making sure that people know what you are doing. Okay. And the last here is thinking about how companies can support women of color. Women of color need 2 things. They need affinity groups where people just get it, right? Where they don't have to explain to somebody like me who's not going to understand, right? Where they can just be in a space where people understand what they are going through. But also they need allies and advocates of other races. And here's where I would love to uplift the message of a friend and colleague of mine, Minda Harts, who wrote an incredible book called The Memo: What Women of Color Need to Know to Secure a Seat at the Table. Minda is a force. This book is incredible for women of color. It is a strong first-person experience. Minda knows of what she speaks, and she's incredibly relatable and knowledgeable. But as a white woman, and I'll say, as a white person generally, I think white women and men can pick this book up for this point. Minda has challenged me personally to think about my role as an ally. To a lot of Black women, thank you, Nikki, for writing that in there. For a lot of Black women, ally reads like thoughts and prayers, like I'm wishing you well, all the best, good luck with that. Minda challenges us to move beyond that to thinking about being a success partner. What does that mean? It means that I take tangible, sustained action toward the success and happiness of women of color at work. For me personally, I will say, I get asked to serve on a lot of panels, and I'm ashamed to admit this, but I'm going to admit this. Up until June of this year, I didn't always look to see who else was on the panel, right? I would say yes, and then I would show up, I would look in the room, and it would be a panel on pay equity, and yet again, it was all white women. And so I would get up there and I would feel tremendously guilty. And when I was talking, I would say, we need to acknowledge that we're all white women up here and the situation is not the same for our sisters of color. Let's talk about the statistics. After June, I said to myself, I am not doing enough. I need to do better. Now, when I am asked to be on panels, I look at who else is on the panel. And if it's all white women, I write a private note to the organizer and say, right, may I introduce you to some women of color, right? I think that our panel is not diverse. We are not speaking to all audiences. And I know some incredible people who would make great additions to this panel. Every single person has been grateful, has said yes, and our panels have all been better for that. And so there are actions that we can take in our everyday lives to be support partners. And the last thing I want to leave you with today is a strategy that you can use to do just that. And this is the subject of my latest writing project, which I'm incredibly excited about. It is a skill called amplification. Who has heard about this? So I want to take you back to the first Obama White House. Believe it or not, when President Obama first took office, 2/3 of his senior staffers were men. And female staffers adopted a meeting strategy that they called amplification. All right, so let's say, for example, that Lauren, who just wrote in the chat, raises her hand and makes a point. Okay, then Tanya raises her hand right after and says, everyone, I'd like to circle us back to Lauren's excellent point. Here's what Lauren said that I think is valuable. In other words, she speaks Lauren's name and she gives her credit. So women started doing this in the White House. And over time, they found that instead of being ignored in meetings, instead of having their ideas taken, that their ideas were heard more and that it increased their power overall at the table. So an Obama aide said, we just started doing it and made a purpose of doing it. It was an everyday thing. So as a result, President Obama, God bless him, began calling on women more. He noticed. He started calling on women. He called on junior people. And so there were a wider circle of people being heard at the table and more ideas being raised. Do you know, in his second term, women gained parity with men among senior positions? You know, another book that's out there on this is about shine theory. I don't shine if you don't shine. When we amplify other people, believe it or not, we benefit them, we benefit our organization, and we benefit ourselves. Because when we are seen as somebody who is an amplifier, that is somebody that people want to be in community with. If you want more, influence, give it away. We know as mediators, it's not a zero-sum game out there in the world. There are always people that we can lift up, and I believe in increasing the pie. And when, we have that rising tide, we're going to lift all boats. So here is the amplification formula. And here's where I want to speak to everybody in the room. People of any gender, this is something that you can do to uplift other people. Speak their name and give them credit. These days, when I enter a room, as a professor now with some gray hair and some experience, I'm thinking about whose voice can I elevate? And here's the key. You can't just elevate the idea. If you elevate somebody's idea without elevating the person, that's not amplification, that's appropriation. That's taking their idea. Similarly, if you elevate them as a person, but you don't talk about their ideas, then if I say Tanya's really a great person, that's not amplification. That's just a personal compliment or an endorsement. To amplify, we need to speak their name and give them credit. And I want to end on a personal note here today. When you amplify somebody, they never forget it for the rest of their lives. They never forget it. And you don't know what chain reaction you may start in them. And I want to talk to you about a young female lawyer in 2004 who arrived at her law firm for the first time. And she, along with her team of junior associates, were asked to get up in front of an entire room of partners and present about a portion of a litigation that they were working on. So they each presented for a few minutes. And at the end of the presentation, the senior woman partner in the room called out the name of the female associate. That associate was me. And she turned to me and she said, Alex, in front of everybody, she said this, Alex, has anybody ever told you that you are great at the front of a room? And I remember kind of like looking to my left and looking to my right and saying, me? And she said, yes, you. You're an incredible teacher, and I want to put you on the Cravath CLE lecture circuit so that you can speak to our associates and you can also speak to our clients. And that was the day that I went home and I started thinking of myself differently. Like, what if I could be a teacher? What if I could, from the front of the room, help give people tools that they could use to make their lives better? That partner's name is Julie North. And this year in February, before everything shut down, I took her out to coffee 16 years later to tell her that I never forgot that day that she amplified me. And that by doing that, she set into motion this process by which I would become a professor, a mediator, I'm a teacher, and I'm somebody who is now a speaker. And I speak to people all over the world every day. And truly, every day I wake up pinching myself that I get to do this work. And in part, it's because of the people who poured into me and amplified me. And there are many of those people in this room. And so here's where I want to thank you so much for being with me this morning. I can't tell you what it has meant to me to be in this community and to be sharing with all of you. I have a website where I give free advice on my email list. And I also have free programs on various topics that are totally downloadable and shareable, including on negotiating virtually. And I always tell people when we train together that now, like it or not, we're colleagues for life. And so I insist that you stay in touch. I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Instagram, and you can also, again, find me on my website, which is alexcarterasks.com. And so thank you very much. I will pause here. I will look in the chat and be happy to take some questions. Ooh, somebody wrote me a direct message to say Fiona Apple has a new song about amplifying. I am gonna write that down. Who knew I was gonna get pop culture advice from this group on top of everything else? You all are truly amazing. Okay, so what questions? Take yourself off mute. You can, you're welcome to do this, or you can raise hands in Zoom. And I'm so grateful for this feedback. Oh my goodness, this is just lovely.
Hi, Alex. My name is Eileen Brownell. I just want to say I want to amplify Alex Carter. Thank you for this fabulous presentation, for inspiring me and probably most everybody else. And when I go back to teaching on Zoom in 2 weeks, I am going to remember this. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That means a lot to me. And
oh, I forgot I was off camera. Now I'm on camera.
Now you're on camera. Hi, Eileen. It's so nice to see you. And thank you so much for that.
You're so welcome.
We did get a question from Gail in the chat. How is Tell Me helpful when negotiating about money? Great question, Gail. It's actually tremendously helpful. I counsel a lot of women and men who are negotiating salary or getting jobs during this time. And the most gratifying note, perhaps, that I've received was about a month ago from a woman who wrote to me. I've never met her. And she said, Alex, I didn't think I could read a negotiation book. I have my associate's degree. I didn't even finish college, but I found yours very readable. And I'm calling to tell you that I got a job during coronavirus at a great salary simply by using Tell Me. And she, throughout the interview, she treated it like a negotiation. And she said, tell me your greatest needs for this position. Tell me the last superstar you hired and what made that person so fabulous. Tell me, if we fast forwarded 12 months from now, what success would look like here. And then when they made their initial offer, she said, so I've done research and here's where I should be. Tell me what we might be able to do to get my compensation to the level that my accomplishments require. And she said she landed the job and she was able to negotiate the salary purely on the strength of Tell Me. You know, we all know this, that Tell Me, I think, often reads as a soft question. It's really a command, right? it's really in the imperative mood. And so it's actually a powerful, powerful tool that people can use when talking about money. And I love this because people are actually talking about the folks who have amplified them. And Tanya's saying, I'm so grateful to a former professor, Veronica Sullivan, for connecting me to this group. She was my professor in grad school course, negotiation and conflict resolution. I've gained so much by attending these roundtable breakfasts. That's incredible. I love that.
Alex, thank you so much for this. I'm incredibly moved by everything you're saying. And my most recent mentor is a woman for the first time in my life, and an incredible woman who I want everybody to read her book. I've been talking about this for weeks now since I've been inspired by her work. It's Dr. Sue Morter. She's written a book called The Energy Codes. I've trained with her now. I read the book to people wherever I can, because it's her story. I can't tell her story. Someday maybe I'll tell mine. But at this point, and I just want to say how much I was impressed by this imposter syndrome, because I've been living by that all my life, from a dominant father to being bullied as a kid because I was small and different from everybody else. And so I've been hiding behind people like Dr. Sue and things like that. And I'm ready, I think, to step out and actually do more of my own presentation of myself. Thank you, Alex.
Harvey, that's such a, thank you. Happy New Year. That's such a gift to me today, Harvey. And I want to thank you for reminding us that, you know, sometimes I speak to women because that's the seat I'm in, but it's not just women who struggle with imposter syndrome. And there are so many of us that feel different or less than, or we've been told that we're different or less than, you know, throughout our lives. And I think it's actually in a way, a profound gift to have experienced that, because sometimes then we can offer people the gift of seeing themselves more clearly. And my bet, Harvey, is that you've helped many people over the course of your career to see themselves more completely and more compassionately than they have before. And sometimes it's then the hardest to turn that on ourselves.
Thank you. I also want to set straight that being in hospice doesn't mean that you don't have the person you love with you. My wife is right beside me right now, and watching her rally during this period when I really expected in June for her to be on her deathbed is such an incredible privilege. And I have to say that I think that my work with Dr. Sue and the work that I'm doing on myself is actually contributing to her becoming whatever she is now, and thriving.
That's an incredible story. Thank you. And my thoughts are with you and with her. And I will say that the time we've had in hospice has been some of the most meaningful time I have ever had with my dad. And he's not capable of speech anymore, which is really remarkable for somebody who was a brilliant attorney. But I found, in fact, that we know this as mediators, you don't need speech to connect with someone. Sometimes you can sit in someone's presence in silence and you can powerfully, powerfully connect with them. And that's some of what I've experienced.
Yes, and everything is energy. That's Dr. Sue's message. Everything is energy.
That's wonderful.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
Bye
We've
now.
gotten a couple of questions. People asking me about the we. If I could talk about that again, right? So here's what that looks like. When you are asking an we, you're doing the following. You're saying, here's what I'm requesting, and here's how we all benefit. So in other words, before you're making your request, you have asked a lot of questions about the other person's goals, about their needs, about their greatest concerns. And so by the time you are ready to think about making a proposal, you're able to do it by tying what you are requesting to that concern of the other person. And so that can be a really, really powerful way for the person to know that they've been heard, that they've been considered, and that you've given thought to how you can work together most productively. And I hope that that is helpful. So here's somebody, how do you address a supervisor that appropriates your intellectual property and amplifies themselves at the expense of their subordinates? Many times minorities and women accomplish invisible labor that's outside the scope of their role because expectations are informal. And yes, we talked about that invisible labor, right? The office housework. How do you stop a shine and wage theft with a bully supervisor who has reached success by piracy and intimidation? Well, so thank you for this question. I'm very sorry that you've been experiencing this. Sadly, this is not an uncommon question. You know, and I think here it really depends. Some of what I know people have done is to seek other allies of power at a particular company to try to increase their leverage in numbers. And sometimes this is a problem that cannot be solved unless that person is brought to account. And then that is a different conversation, perhaps, that involves either human resources or more of a legal conversation.
Alex, I need to interrupt to just
Yes.
say it is 10 o'clock and officially we are ending this session. I know you have other commitments. I don't know how long you can stay, but
Like 5 minutes.
it doesn't take brain surgery to know this was a smash hit. The feedback on the chat is awesome, stunning. And thank you so very much for sharing your wisdom and your insight with all of us.
Thank
Ditto,
you.
ditto. You have been phenomenal, Alex. Thank you so much. And as Julie said, we can now open up this discussion again to any other topic, but officially the breakfast has been adjourned.
Thank you. I can
Thank
stay
you
for a
very
few
much.
minutes, and I'm gonna continue to comb the
Great.
chat.
Wonderful. Yeah, someone would listen to the same presentation all over again. Are you ready to start at the beginning?
I do love speaking, but I have to be careful every so often, Julie. If I'm talking too much, I get vocal strain. You know, back in February, I was doing so many podcasts and interviews for the upcoming book release, that I lost my voice, and I went to the doctor and he said, it's vocal strain. And I said, well, what's the treatment for that? Can't you give me a shot or something? And he said, the treatment is shutting up.
Silence.
And so,
right?
right, basically. And it was a powerful lesson because I was forced to be in silence for a week. And we all know what happens when you're in silence for a week, which is you learn so much more and you connect to so many more people than you ever did when you were just running your mouth. Gail, I see that you've taken yourself off mute.
Oh, I did. Another sermon's about to come. Or is it a benediction? Recently I reread and did a talk on microaggressions. And when you were talking about how to respond, whether you go to your legal counsel, I think there's so many stages in that. And one of the quotes in a great book to read that's truly inspirational by a very significant person, Justice Sotomayor, in her biography talks about how she dealt with microaggressions when she was at Yale and then when she went to a law firm, and how she handled it and how she would handle it now. And I recommend it as a very inspirational book and one that's very powerful in terms of understanding and appreciating how to deal with microaggressions. And they come from everywhere. You know, one of the big disappointments that I may have has to do with microaggressions from people that I would think would be allies, which would be white women. And quite the opposite. In the earlier chat, I talked about the I and the we, and how we as women don't want to adopt negative behaviors, which is I did this and I did that and I'm, nobody doing it is good. And I think that at some point, we also need to be concerned about mimicking negative behaviors that are based upon power. Because what we're looking for is, I think you so beautifully discussed today, is empowerment and equity when we all see that there's room for all of us around the table. Yeah.
Thank you, Gail. I have to say, you've raised some really important points. And I think, one of the things that I've always struggled with when presenting information like this is navigating that tension that I think you've just brought forward for us, which is, how do we work within what is, how do we give people tools to survive and to thrive in their institutions as they are now, while also changing the culture and pushing back against, as you said, sort of the negative attitudes and like the systemic, sexism and racism that says there's one way to be successful and here's how we do it, by sucking up all the oxygen in the room. I admit, Gail, to continue to think that erasure of the I is something that is happening, and that there are ways to talk about what one has achieved in a way that also invites other people to the conversation, that amplifies them, and that creates more opportunities for service. And it's always that line that I'm attempting to navigate. But thank you for bringing that forth for us.
Thank you.
Tanya has asked, will there be a link to the recording? I assume so. Maria's been doing this for 20 years. So, she's got this down, I assume.
I posted it in the chat earlier. The recording will be posted on www.acr-gny.org. On the left-hand sidebar, you'll see videos, and we've posted all of them since April. So there's a wonderful collection there. And everyone who registers for the breakfast will get an email with the link. And Alex, you said you would share the PowerPoint, so we will include that in the mailing. And that will probably come sometime next week. So look forward to your mail, and you can check it in the on the www.acr-gny.org website. We'll soon post them on the CUNY Dispute Resolution Center's website as well, but for the time being, they're on the ACR-GNY website.
Great, and I'm just sending this over now to you before I get sucked back into the news. What a welcome distraction this has been. So the PowerPoint is off to all of you.
Thank you.
Great.
Any other questions from folks?
Alex, just to thank you so much.
Yeah. We still have 123 people on the call.
Yeah, and so I'm just combing through to make sure that I've gotten what's next on the agenda. This is from R. Patino, and I'm not sure, maybe that means for Maria, what is next on the, I've got a lot of stuff that's next on my agenda, including making sure that my daughter is attending her homeschool.
Our next speaker will be addressing issues, end of life issues.
Wow.
And we'll send out a comprehensive notice in the next week or so. But there are a lot of end of life issues accompanying the COVID virus, not just if your partner or beloved one is in hospice, but access to, answers to questions about, conversations one ought to have before it's too late. I think it's a very timely topic, and one that may take us off the subject of politics for a while.
He is a physician by training, so
Right.
He will also share what it's like from his perspective.
And he came to us and said, in my 40 years of practice, it's become clear to me that those conversations are not held when they should be held, and that we as physicians can help facilitate them. I think maybe your group might be interested in hearing more about that. So I'm particularly hoping that mediators and conflict resolvers who deal with elder care and end-of-life issues will join us, because our speaker's looking forward to a collaborative process. And I'm having a senior moment, and I can't remember his first name, and I'm the one who got him. So there you have it.
Khalid Raymond.
Raymond, right.
Dr. Khalid Raymond.
And actually his wife, Sabia, spoke to us with about a book that she and a Jewish journalist from Washington wrote on We Refuse to Be Enemies. So we have some experience with this wonderful family. I first came across them at Chautauqua a couple of summers ago when she and her husband were running a week-long course on Islam 101. Very interesting couple, and I think it will be a great presentation.
I was just responding in the chat to a question from Robin about where the term amplification first appeared. And I have a team digging into this, but to my knowledge, the first time it appeared in the public sphere was in this article, I think it was 2016, in the Washington Post about the Obama White House, written by reporter Juliet Alperin. There is also a law review article, I'm forgetting the author, Shelley Cavalieri, I want to say, is the author, and it's about feminist amplification, sort of extra legal acts of resistance in the Me Too era is the title of that law review article to read a little bit more. But as I said, I'm currently book on that topic, so I'll keep folks posted. With that, I probably should go to attend to my daughter.
Your
and
daughter.
I thank you. Yes.
Thank you again. This was absolutely phenomenal.
Wonderful,
Alex.
Alex.
This was
Thank you.
excellent, excellent.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Thank you. I
Thank
hope
you.
somebody got a
Thank
screenshot of the screen. Does anybody
Yes.
ever do that? Okay, fantastic. You guys are on top
Thank
of that. So wonderful. Thank you. It's been an honor.
Thank you.
And be well, everybody. Stay safe.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye,
Thank you.
Alex.
Thank you.
And with that,
Thank you, Maria and everybody. It was amazing. I
Yeah.
feel so lucky to have joined this group. And this is one of the advantages of COVID, that we make it.
Yeah.
and
We're glad
we
to have you. Thank you for
Amazing.
joining.
Really amazing, Maria, Chuck.
we have heard from our CUNY chancellor. We will be on remote, virtual through spring semester. So we will continue these virtual breakfasts because we don't have any options. We were informed 2 days ago that we will begin to go back to in-person classes in September. The working group that puts this breakfast together will have a discussion about our own future here. There was a time when we could not imagine being virtually, right, like the rest of the field that pivoted to online mediation. Well, now we wonder what it will look like if we ever go back to in-person, whether we'll continue the virtual. So stay tuned for some decisions about what our own future will be like.
About what time we're going to have to get up in the morning.
I hope we continue virtual because it brings in people and different cultures and different ideas from all over the world, all the places, not just New York City. So I'm hoping it does continue.
There was
Great.
nothing like the magic of being in the room starting at 8 a.m. on the first Thursday of the month, where we could all come together and have coffee and bagels together and have those sidebars if you wanted to with individuals and meet individuals face to face. There's also nothing like the magic of seeing hundreds of our colleagues since April on the screen.
On the screen, yeah. All right, I am signing off. See
Okay.
you next
Thanks,
month.
Julie.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.